Great, thank you. So thank you all for your exciting presentations, both kind of from the museum perspective, artistic perspective, and the commercial gallery perspective. And I think as kind of the theme for the panel was curating and exhibiting AI art, I wanted to ask, like, because AI art is just one of the art forms, and what do you think makes it, what are some of the challenges related to curating and exhibiting AI art in particular, as opposed to maybe digital art or traditional art forms? Yeah, what do you think makes AI art in particular a challenge? So, I think you can start maybe with it.
With AI specifically is, I think, again, the audience. When a general audience thinks about AI, they're going to think about mid-journey and stable diffusion. And as we know, that is not the case. A lot of the AI artists that we work with have been in this industry for quite some time. Luba actually curated a lovely show for us of some of the major actors and artists in this space that are building these systems themselves. And it's how do we convey that to an audience that just does it now? As well as, I think commercially and curatorially, it's our duty to say, just because you are creating creative outputs doesn't necessarily make you have an artistic practice. And how do you have those hard conversations as well? No one can just rock up now and say, oh, I put in this and got an output, can I sell it?
I can say something. Because I am involved in curation on mprops.ai, and so one of the challenges is the long form that Abby was referencing. And so with long form, you have to let go of some control. So AI artists who are used to kind of producing hundreds of images and then self-curating them, in our system, they have to basically write an algorithm and say, I'm going to let go, and there's going to be some edge cases. So that's actually a big challenge in terms of getting them to kind of be comfortable with that type of model for us.
I guess it's also related to the way that you showcase the works without making them too conceptual or cerebral, but it's balancing that against the entertainment part of it that can be easily flow into with some of the works that are so richly visually engaging that people see them more as an entertainment. And it's the difficulties in how to convey the process of the artist with the thinking behind the work, but it's very similar to what happened with conceptual art, and it still happens today with conceptual art practices, that people go into museums and find it hard to engage with them without understanding the process. And I guess also in terms of just for museum practices, conservation is a big issue. Because we have to consider how maybe we have to preserve the work outside of its original environment, and we're looking into a hybrid model of collective works that includes some physical aspects to it, and especially because we have to think in posterity of 100 years, 200 years from now, where we'll have them in some of those works with the technology becoming also that seems quite quickly.
So I think for me, there's two distinct bodies of work being produced. I think there's artists that are using these technologies like paint, and there's artists that are using these technologies as their narrative. And I think how they're collected, acquired, curated is quite different. One of them sits very much in that political discourse around these technologies, and the other's narrative is much more focused on individual artistic output, and they're simply using the technologies as an artist would use paint. So I think for me, there's a core distinction between the two groups of artists and how they're using the technology.
Okay, thank you. And I think the next question I'd like to ask would be about NFTs. So Abigail and Ira, you both sort of mentioned them and how you're engaging with them. And I wanted to hear from the panel, how do you think NFTs fit in with the AI art? Do they present kind of lots of opportunities? Are there any kind of drawbacks? What's kind of your thoughts and experiences on that?
Should I? So I was really involved with the generative space with FX Hash, but I was also involved with the AI. And there was no way for me to integrate the AI into the generative space. And that's the reason that mprops.ai was founded, was to exactly do that. So for us, it's actually a critical extension of generative art AI, kind of a natural extension. But there's still a lot of work to be done, I think, in terms of connecting it to the NFT space.
I think overall, NFTs and digital art and AI art, it offers an element of scarcity to this artwork to sell it. You can prove who the owner is of this digital AI artwork, which is quite valuable when it comes into the conversation of IP in AI, as well as essentially, my opinion changes every day, working so closely with people who are rapidly creating in this ecosystem. I think AI is going to be critically important to the development of blockchain, but I don't necessarily think, I think ask me in a year and I'll have a much more critical answer, because the boom of AI NFTs has really happened in the last 3 months. And this critical space around it is very much evolving.
Anybody else? No? Okay, I noticed that the other groups seem to have finished, so probably we should take 1 or 2 audience questions if there are any. Yeah, I can see you've got a question, and then also you in the back, so we'll take those 2.
Thank you. So, something which is quite a broad presentation, which I was really interested in, is how you talk about embodying the algorithm and drawing. And in a sense, this is for everybody on the panel, especially when we see the history of pre-universal computational art about the 60s. How we start thinking about AI or generative art as material, and within the context of digital materialism and conceptualism, because in a sense that's the people which I'm really liking politically, and of course the AI needs to be political, and it's a medium, it's a role, it's also the context in which we live as artists. So maybe there's a lot to learn for all of you, please.
Before I let the experts on the academic side speak, specifically in Web3, I think there's an emphasis on dematerialization in a lot of these conversations, and I don't necessarily agree with that. I think on NFTs, Web3 specifically, when we look back, we aren't going to be talking about this as a movement of dematerialization or how do we bring it into the material, but rather a shift in digital consciousness, in this role of dichotomy of collector to artist. An artist is no longer about exercising singular identity, but rather how do they exercise this community identity? What are they building that's beyond them, that impacts maybe 100 to 100,000 people and goes beyond what even they are dictating? And I think that's really with what I do, I see, as well as with materialization, I do think in the next coming years, people are going to be wanting to display it differently. Maybe that answers your question then. What it is viewed on the phone or a computer.
I guess in terms of materialization, at least for it can be seen from different aspects like acquisition, exhibition, but we work very closely with the artists to think about the legacy of the works and about the process and what is important for the process in them. Like for example, last year I worked closely with Sue Chung, who was speaking earlier about her neural network model. And we were the first museum to acquire the model, so we didn't have any precedent. And also when we're acquiring digital artworks, the experience is very different. Like there's not really a standard way of thinking about the material and how it's going to be accessed into the collection or how is it going to be displayed. So, for example, with Sue, when we were thinking about how we could acquire her process of working to artificial intelligence based on her drawing archive from 20 years. So we end up going back into, I feel bad because I already mentioned conceptual art practices, but we were thinking about how you can perform the idea or the archive into the future. And we archive the software that she uses to program the two robots as a neural network model. And we also acquire a 3D print that physically contains the models. And we are also acquiring the archive of her. But the way the work is going to be presented at B&A East in 2024 is going to be through her performance with the robots. So it really changed depending on the artistic practice and the way the artist favors certain process or materials within that.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if I totally understood the question, or if I heard it properly, but in terms of materialization, Yeah. So I wrote a lot and spoken a lot about the materiality of computation, which I don't know really what the hell it means, but I talked about it a lot. And I talk about the materiality of AI. So we see it with I've spent a lot of time on panels talking about how AI is getting ruined by good-intentioned engineers. Because when we get 6 fingers on a hand or we get certain types of artifacting, it's an opportunity for the artist to sort of improvise and work off of that. And as things get perfected, the reason many of us started coding was because the Adobe, Photoshop was too good, and undo and redo took all the friction out of the creative process. So I wanted code. So that's the materiality. But I still think I'm thinking more now about materiality, obviously back into a physical space. But this is a very personal thing. I think for some artists that doesn't need to manifest into a material object. But I think about materiality a lot.
Great, okay, so I'll just take the last question.
Very good. So I'm really struggling in the NFT space. So I was talking about turning to different formats, digital, analog. Having my 70 years in NFT, we started printing them out with ink water on watercolor paper and posting to people. And that catharsis, the actual hanging on the wall, I can't see how an NFT will replace that drawing or putting something on the wall. However, even I start doing NFTs now, so I can only see in it. So what's the thought? It's dichotomy of the catharsis of the real and the immediacy of the digital.
Go for Abby. Let's go to me, of course. So, again, I'm having some hearing, but what was the crux of it was the value of the digital asset, like the token, versus the material piece?
No, it's more about the catharsis of it. Hanging a piece of art.
Oh.
Is being painted or printed, even if it's come from the digital realm. How do we feel as a panel about the catharsis of analog art and the immediacy of digital art and the value of each societally and financially?
Yeah, no, it's a great. I think it's obviously a personal question, right? An intaglio, a printing plate, right, an etching plate has a certain identity, but most of us don't display the etching plate. We care about the print, or a monoprint where it just disappears on the surface. So I think there are precedents for this sort of thing. But for instance, with emergent properties, we think about this all the time about printing the pieces. I think it's also how old we are. If you ask my son, who grew up as a digital native, there may be for him looking at it on his phone, maybe like the warm fuzzies I get when I put a piece on the wall. So I think it changes for us.
I definitely agree with that new generation. I grew up in the age of Tumblr, DeviantArt, a lot of the art. I grew up in a very small town, rural Nebraska. The closest museum was 8 hours away. And so how I consumed art growing up was on the computer, and a lot of people in the world consume art that way, and will only consume art that way. As well as this gets into technicality of the blockchain that I can talk to hours on, is when you buy an NFT, 99% of the time you are actually not buying the digital file artwork. you are buying the certificate of authenticity. So it's kind of a different act. You'll still be sent, if you wanted to, a physical USB, if that's how the artist wants to sell it. There is different cases of like SVG files living on chain and other things called like autoglyphs that are most well known. But for the majority of it is like, why wouldn't you want to collect digital art? It is a different mode of art, and why should it not be considered equal to painting? Why is that physicality in our current society the most valuable thing of art?
I'm going to do your